Hello, and thank you for inviting me to address this important conference on organisation and civil society, organisational education, futures in organising. In this presentation, I propose a political theory of social innovation by introducing and reviewing some recent claims made for the ways in which social innovation can create or co-create public goods and services by utilising forms of collective intelligence and internet-based platforms. So this presentation provides a discussion of the literature on collective intelligence and before investigating new forms and ways of delivering public goods and services through forms of co-creation and co-production, which involve a level of education. So let's start with the definition then. This is one definition by Phils in 2009 that suggests that social innovation can be understood by the quote, the penetration of business ideas, management practices and market principles into the world of non-profits and government. This emphasis is on social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, and particularly evidence of the work of the Stanford Centre for Social Innovation in the Graduate School of Business. Here's Phil's again, any novel and useful solution to a social need or problem that is better than existing approaches accrues primarily to society as a whole rather than to private individuals. So this is the emphasis on innovation together, co-creation and the co-production of public services. So I think it involves also a question about open innovation. Firms can and should use these external ideas as well as internal ideas to create paths to the market as the firm looks towards advancing their technology. So, there are searches outside organisational boundaries which helps to implement open innovation in the public sector. And this kind of involvement is referred in the literature to as co-creation and co-production. And although these terms were used a lot in the 1970s, they've gained a new kind of renewed interest as a result of the internet-based platforms and apps. So we can say that what began really, when we're talking about innovation as an economic theory based on social media principles, has recently become what I would call a political theory of social innovation. And that should become obvious during the rest of this presentation. So this political theory really is a development to create citizens who are capable of participating in collective awareness and collective problem solving through the processes of co-creation, co-designing, co-evaluation in social and public goods and services. So here we have the initiative which really embodies the ethos of participation, sharing, interconnectivity, which is really at the heart of the new social media technologies. Here's one study that begins to look more closely at leading public sector innovation. This is from Christian Basin, 2010. It's really looking at a kind of innovation where leaders in government build an infrastructure of innovation which is really a public sector innovation ecosystem. It's one to which can utilise existing programs of education at all levels. And the ecosystem is built through the 4 simultaneous shifts in how the public sector creates solutions. A shift from, he says, from random innovation to conscious and systematic approach in public sector renewal. A shift from management of human resources to building innovation capacity at all levels of government, particularly local level. A shift from running tasks and projects to orchestrating processes of co-creation and creating new jobs with people, not for them, but by them and with them. And a shift from administering public organisations to much more courageously leading innovation across and beyond the public sector. So we're talking about initiating and developing citizen value creation processes. And these citizen value creation processes, which make use of co-creation and co-production as the basis for a systematic reform of the public sector. And here, in this space, we're talking about the process of open participation by citizens in changing relationships, positions and roles among major stakeholders, with the emergence of new forms of collective behaviour enabled by social media, which encourage and promote collaborative problem solving at the local level. So let me say a little bit more about citizen value creation through the concept of collective intelligence. We're looking at Jeff Mulgan, who was one of the leading lights in Demos, the British think tank. Here, coming to the notion of collective intelligence, he suggests that there are some stunning examples of collective intelligence in social media, which are untheorised and undeveloped at this stage. And in this space, he locates systems and institutions which can become more intelligent, where organisation of machine learning and behaviour interact with collective intelligence and collective problem solving. And he uses Verdansky's concept of noosphere, the third phase of collective intelligence that comes, historically speaking, after the development of geosphere and biosphere. Okay, so one useful way of looking at the kinds of affordances of social media to promote collective intelligence is by giving a kind of typology, and I've created one here. But let me just say for a moment that collective intelligence stands in a spectrum. We have at one point collective awareness at the one end of the spectrum, collective responsibility, collective action at the other end. In the middle there we're talking about collective intelligence and collective meaning. So let me just look very briefly at types of collective intelligence. And we can see that I've looked at developing 6 of these different types of collective intelligence. Biological, which is the swarm intelligence represented not only by social insects but also by fauna and flora, animals that like ants and bees that hive together or that cooperate together, dominant centre. Birds that fly together in flocks, and fish that swim together in schools. We can see there is also a political dimension to this, and many of the writings around epistemic democracy show similar kinds of patterns, and the analogy has been drawn once we accept this political analogy, one can also see its applications in the area of administration and public policy through the concepts of co-creation and co-production, and in particular through peer production. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more. In the area of psychology, we can talk about this in cognitive terms, which relates to the epistemic versions of democracy, the so-called paradigm of the embodied mind that is extended, embedded, enacted. Again, we have theories of social cognition that begin to theorize this. A fifth type of collective intelligence is that around in the technological sphere, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the genetic algorithms, learning analytics that everybody's talking about, big data, open source software, and so on. And from an evolutionary point of view, I've mentioned noosphere, Verdansky's notion of noosphere, but also we can talk here about the research program called Global Brain, and I'm going to be explaining that a little bit further down the track. I think the general question should be recognised, the general issue is that as yet there is no general theory of collective behaviour. But let's go back to each of these. I'm looking at the work of Deborah Gordon on an ecological approach to collective behaviour in animals. So, we've got, again, that spectrum that goes from collective consciousness, collective intentionality, collective meaning, collective intelligence, collective behaviour, and then we're moving into responsibility and collective action. In animals, these are systems without central control, very common in nature, and we might refer to them as models of self-organisation in the way that they socialise flocks, schools and swarms. I mentioned that. But not all collective behaviour is in collective intelligence. Okay, so it's not all collective intelligence. Sumter says that humans are inherently social animals, if I'm quoting him here, whose activities exhibit many of the elements of cooperation and conflict found in other animal societies. And here there is the centrality of information, particularly, well, let me give an example in terms of information sharing relating to the location of local food sources. Okay, so principles of behavioural algorithms, this is getting a bit more technical, but in the biological literature here, the key to underlying collective behaviour lies, as the Royal Society says here, in terms of identifying principles of behavioural algorithms, followed by individual animals, and that begins to chart how information flows between animals. So these principles involve positive feedback, response thresholds, individual integrity, and so on. I'm not going to go into that in any great detail here because I really want to focus on the not the animal kingdom so much as the human affairs, and in particular political applications. So Condorcet's jury theorem is often used here. It comes from Marquis Condorcet, 1785, a long time ago now, who wrote the essay on the application of analysis to the probability of majority decisions, a document which includes what's known as the Condorcet's jury, which provides a relative probability of a given group of individuals arriving at a correct decision. And this theorem over the years has led to studies of the logic of majority judgments, and also to notions of epistemic democracy. In the case of the former, then, more concern lies with the truth of tracking social decision making than with the fairness of its effects. Okay, so when we begin to apply it in notions of epistemic democracy, as Elizabeth Anderson has, where she investigates epistemic powers of democratic institutions through an assessment of epistemic models of democracy, which includes Condorcet's jury theorem. Anderson's arguing here for Dewey's experimentalist model, which defines democracy, quote, as the use of social intelligence to solve problems of practical interest. David Estlund explains a great deal of variety in epistemic approaches to democracy, but they are all derived from the value of free public discourse that epistemically guides political practice. And if I can quote this here from him, one version might say that there are right answers and that democracy. Another version might say that there are right answers and there is value in trying collectively to get at them, whether or not that's the most reliable way. Yet another says that there are no right answers independent of the political process, but overall it is best conceived as a collective way of coming to know and institute what to do. I'm hoping that one can see the applications and the political theory of innovation in those comments. So, and I really want to provide a quick reference to Charles Sanders Peirce's community of inquiry, because I think probably, at least in my view, the logic that he expounds provides the most significant, I think, application of this process in his notion of community of inquiry. So we know that lots of philosophers, going back to Rousseau, Mill, Peirce, Dewey, Habermas, Rawls, Rorty, have assumed that there is an intimate conceptual and practical connection between epistemology and democracy. And Peirce's account of the logic of the community of inquiry, I think, comes closest to describing this. Here Forster argues that Peirce takes scientific inquiry to be justified, not just because it is ultimately it is self-correcting and has the capacity to self-correct, and that's what really provides the epistemic link to a theory of democracy. For Peirce, then, the idea of truth is that consensus is reached in the long run by a community of inquirers, however long that might take. And I'm looking at Thalys's work as well here, who's developed an argument for a Peircean conception of democratic politics based on the expression of responsible epistemic agency that is only understood to flourish in democratic society. So here's one realm where we might see this begin. Production is regarded by Yochai Benkler, the law professor at Yale, as a modality of collective intelligence and also as a form of open creation. That is a form of collaboration that is exemplified in the interactions between online participants who share and self-organize activities in decentralized ways. And you know, these activities are not necessarily dominated by the profit motive. So peer production, and he's written a great deal about this over the years, going back to the mid-2000s, peer production has come about through the development of distributed organizational forms that do not require financial incentives of markets or coercive obligations of bureaucracy. So this mode of peer production represents a stunning and paradigmatic development or modality of collective intelligence. Collaborative communities on the internet operate in this way include Wikipedia, we know, the GNU, Linux operating systems, FLOSS, and so on. And peer production, also we might note, especially in relation to earlier comments by Peirce, that peer production is central to the scientific community and is more readily recognised in institutional systems of peer review and peer governance of the global academic journal publishing system, which really originates with the Royal Society in the 17th century, with the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society going back to the 1660s. So we can see the application today of these peer production systems in terms of online platforms, where we can see them, where we can think of them as a sort of social innovation that has arisen as a result of these network systems and online platforms, the internet. Therefore, the internet as platform has really become the ambit of cognitive interactions that this form of collective action now, and here we are talking about action now, collective action most rapidly activates. So if we can return to the model of social cognition, then we can see also here, and I'm elaborating these different types of collective intelligence. We see that notions of social and embodied cognition have called into question the unparalleled sway of computer-based models of human cognition, which have dominated the science of cognition. The first computers appear. Now, increasingly, this abstract, internalist, individualist, computer-based model of consciousness has given way to a new model of embodied cognition, or what has become be called the 4 E's, embodied, embedded, extended, and enacted model of social cognition. And you see that this psychological model of cognition as fundamentally social matches well with the online platforms and with models of peer production as a form of collective intelligence. I mean, we also know that this model does have its work by philosophers, I think, principally Wittgenstein very much so, in his work in the later period of the philosophical investigations. Dewey's work, as a pragmatist, and his work on, education and democracy, of course, is very relevant here. Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, Virula, and other psychologists like Vygotsky and Brunner, that provide a kind of social interactivist model which points to kind of pragmatic, culturalist and contextualist conclusions. And of course, in this respect also, we're talking about network systems, which can be oligopolistic. I mean, these are, large one-to-many broadcast media systems that become oligarchies. Or they can be, and more promisingly so, democratic, completely horizontal and deterritorialized systems based on user-generated cultures. We can see here the applications of these systems and the internal platform apps which exemplify both the online interaction and this radical global distribution of shared knowledge between users that have led some critics and also some scholars to assert the existence of forms of global intelligence. And this is an interesting question, because we're also talking about not just civil society, but global civil society based on global intelligence, with such notions as the global brain, built on principles of emergence, encyclopedism, organicism, evolutionary cybernetics, are already implicit to some degree in Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web and in his concept of social machines. So I'm just going to dwell on this for a moment, one slide, and I'm rapidly moving through this presentation, but the Institute of Francis Halidon here studies these forms of distributed intelligence emerging from the internet with the aim of building a long-term vision of information society using mathematics and simulations of a global brain. So we're looking, they're his researchers, also researchers in his institute, are looking at a series of related themes around sustainability, resilience of complex systems, mathematical modelling of self-organisation. Global organisations are dealing with uncertainty, future human metasystems, big history, media presence, networking, social media, gives you the flavour, modelling of innovation, self-organisation of social systems, the emergence of global distributed intelligence. So I think that when we're talking about in this conference about organisation and civil society, we're also talking about something bigger than civil society. We're talking about at the global level, at least anyway. And here's another attempt, not just global brains, but Tim Berners-Lee's paper on social machines, which is another parallel, if you like, concept that tries to get at the concept of social intelligence here. How we can design social machines that really have the capability of helping us to do better science and also to improve the working of democracy. This is Tim Berners-Lee's concept. So, in one paper going back 2009, really one of the first papers on this topic, he wrote a paper called, with Jim Handler, From the Semantic Web to Social Machines, issuing a research challenge for AI on the World Wide Web. And they begin their review by referring to an original vision he expressed in 1999 on the nature of social machines, where on the web, where, quote, people do the creative work and the machine does the administration, which leads to a stage for setting what they call, quote, the evolutionary growth of new social machines that have the ability to create new forms of social process. And they reference the growth of new generation of web applications that enhance democratic structure of user groups and enhance the interactivity and devote themselves to the question of a new generation of web technologies that, quote, create tools that allow groups of users to create, to share, and evolve a new generation of open and interacting social machines. And, one has to also marry this very visionary view of social machines with the kinds of concerns being expressed at the recent Davos, the Rich Man's Club, Davos Summit this year around the question of technological unemployment, where one Oxford study has made the prediction that technology will eliminate 40 to 50% of all the jobs, existing jobs there are in the next 20 years. So, it's something that has to be taken into account here, particularly when we come to looking at education in this regard. So what is education for? And when we face these new social machines that are doing the administration so that people can do creative work on the one hand, and also this prediction about technological unemployment, that provides the framework within which the new education, new pedagogy can be developed. Okay, so coming back to Tim Berners-Lee then, and I want to read this because I think it's an important question. He says, we look ahead to a time when it will be possible to create and then evolve new kinds of social machines that will provide people individually and collectively with the ability to immerse themselves in the accumulated knowledge and the constant interactions of mankind. Again, quite utopian thinking. People's interactions will not just be as passive recipients of information created by others, but also as contributors to this global information space, read global brain, in a way far beyond that of today's web. In looking to this future, our focus is not primarily in terms of the cyber infrastructure of the high-speed supercomputers and their network interconnections, but the even more powerful human interactions enabled by these underlying systems. So he's, when he's talking about the social machines, he's putting emphasis on the way in which these underlying systems can produce more powerful human interactions across time and space. And, really, when we're looking at new education, new pedagogy, this is where we should concentrate our thinking. So, let's begin to move towards a conclusion and application here toward a political theory of social innovation from Fabrizio Sestini, who's the scientific officer of the European Commission, on platform for social innovation. He remarks, again, in the techno-speak, utopian techno-speak, it's just 3 decades in which the internet has evolved from an experimental tool for researchers to a pervasive, omnipresent backbone for society and economy. We might say also for science and education in particular. And it goes on to say hyper-connectivity opens up a new field where successful ideas have nothing in common but their unpredictable bottom-up nature and the ability of exploiting network effects at any level, trying to understand where the next big game changer can emerge. In 2012, he said, we launched a research initiative called Collective Awareness Platforms for Sustainability and Social Innovation, otherwise known as CAPS. Here, the objective was to explore new solutions at the confluence of social networks, knowledge networks, and networks of things. It was a broad concept, and it was very far away from traditional approaches to research funding, which normally requires well-focused technological horizons. Okay, so these collective awareness platforms, I want to end with this because a very practical, policy-oriented approach to organisation and civil society. The European Commission defines these platforms then, which for sustainability and social innovation, IT systems leveraging emerging network effects by combining open online social media, distributed knowledge creation, and data from real environments in order to create awareness of problems and possible solutions requiring collective efforts, enabling new forms of social innovation. So here, and I've spoken about this many times, what I call the virtues of openness, in a book of Peter Roberts I wrote some years ago. Here we see the paradigm of openness being used here, which transforms the way innovation has been traditionally conceptualized as a closed system to one where stakeholders now are in the process of co-creating through the process of collective awareness, engagement, action, sharing knowledge, risks, benefits of the innovation process. And, Armiani and their work and his colleagues discuss the various types of social platforms devoted to engagement and oriented towards analytics and visualization, collective assessment, crowdsourcing, e-democracy, e-participation, direct democracy, geomapping, geoplanning, geonavigation, motivation and engagement, new economic models, open ones, data integration, online deliberation, peer production and collaborative knowledge creation, and social network and social media enhancement. You see the list of topics, which is very similar to the kinds of things that I have been trying to articulate when I talk about a collective theory of social innovation, with an emphasis on the co-creation of social and public goods through collective intelligence. So, social innovation, a final statement here on social innovation and collective intelligence, increasingly draws on models of civil intelligence, of distributed social intelligence, new models of emergence and participatory democracy that revisit these earlier notions of organisational science and learning and action research models within a much more technologized, I should say, framework of the public good that depends on harnessing the full side effects of the new social movements, collaborative problem solving, and Web 2 applications. So, I really want just to end. Thank you very much, by the way, for enabling me to contribute and to participate in this this annual conference. I want to thank the Protestant University of Applied Sciences at Darmstadt, the WERA, World Educational Research Association, the International Research Network in particular, and my personal thanks to Susanna Weber, who's a lovely friend and colleague. Thank you very much for that, and I look forward to hearing the results of the other papers in this conference, and look forward to reading these papers. Thank you very much.